If you know anything about the story of Spartacus, it's probably that "I'm Spartacus" scene from the 1960 movie starring Kirk Douglas. While uplifting, the scene was entirely fake. In reality, the Romans claimed Spartacus died in battle, but they never found his body. If you learned anything from watching movies, it's that if someone appears to die, but they don't find a body, the person is most definitely alive. These facts led many to believe Spartacus would return in a sequel, including Spartacus himself. Unfortunately, Spartacus fought in the Third Servile War, the third war of the trilogy. The franchise had run its course. Rome dumped Spartacus, pivoting to a bromance called the First Triumvirate. Spartacus, a Thracian, never forgave the Romans for cutting his career short and vowed to get revenge. Unfortunately, there was the small matter of the slaughter and crucifixion of his army. When the Romans end a franchise, they really drive a nail into it. Spartacus's only hope was to dodge the bounty on his head and pray for a cameo in a nostalgic franchise reboot sometime in the future. Until then, Spartacus had to go into hiding. Ideally, he would have returned to Thrace to hide amongst his people. Unfortunately, his ex-girlfriend still lived there, and he would rather die than risk an awkward encounter. At a loss, Spartacus wandered through the wilderness. He was cold. He was hungry. He got all his friends killed in a failed uprising. Worst of all, none of the mushrooms were the magic kind. It turns out a lonely walk through the woods without experimental drugs is just a lonely walk through the woods. Soul-searching was not nearly as fun as the wellness magazines made it out to be. With no hope and nothing to live for, Spartacus headed into town to turn himself in. When he walked through the gates, a funny thing happened. No one recognized him. He found a wanted poster of himself and loitered around it. Surely someone would connect the dots. Finally, a couple of guards noticed his presence and promptly arrested him. Not as Spartacus, the escaped slave and war criminal, however, but as an unaccompanied minor guilty of loitering. Wait, what? Spartacus tried to explain who he was, but the guards simply laughed at him. A skinny lad like him? Spartacus? Ha! That's when Spartacus noticed the changes. His muscles were shriveled from malnutrition and limited use. Scars from fighting made it impossible for him to grow a beard. He had never had the deepest voice to begin with, and his height was not worth including in his Tinder profile. Any difference on its own was trivial, but altogether it was undeniable. By all outward appearances, Spartacus was a prepubescent boy. For the crime of loitering, Spartacus was once again sentenced to slavery. Normally, a legal guardian could lessen the sentence to community service with a bribe, but Spartacus had no such luck. He bounced around from owner to owner, town to town, performing menial chores befitting a non-muscular preteen. A slave owner would purchase him, hoping for a growth spurt, become disappointed when his body didn't change, and sell him back on the market. Years passed. Spartacus knew if he was ever going to get revenge, it wouldn't happen in a secluded village. As luck would have it, an Egyptian trading vessel visited his small coastal fishing village, looking to replace crew they had lost during a storm. Unfortunately, they were looking for experienced sailors, which Spartacus was not. What Spartacus did have, however, was experience escaping, so he did just that and stowed away on the Egyptian ship. The voyage was uneventful, and Spartacus soon found himself in Egypt without a plan. A plan was more or less made for him, however, by current events. His old rivals were dead, but another prominent Roman, Julius Caesar, was in the city. His name is more correctly pronounced Julius Caesar, but I won't assault your ears with this distinction. There was a fight for the throne of Egypt, and Caesar had joined one side, so Spartacus naturally joined the other. Besides, Caesar was allied with Cleopatra against her brother. What were the odds a woman would ascend to the throne? Naturally, Cleopatra took the throne shortly after. Thankfully, no one recognized Spartacus or his treason, and he was able to attach himself to Cleopatra's staff. Before he could get close enough to harm Caesar, however, the Roman returned to Rome, while Cleopatra stayed behind. Spartacus worked his way into Cleopatra's favor and convinced her to make the trip to Rome herself. She had given birth to Caesar's son, after all. She had child support to collect. Cleopatra's arrival and the news of Caesar's child did cause some political turmoil, but not to the extent Spartacus hoped for. When the child support arrangement was agreed upon, Cleopatra returned to Egypt, but Spartacus stayed in Rome to keep tabs on the baby daddy. Caesar was out of reach, but the Cleopatra connection allowed Spartacus access to some influential Romans, including a man named Brutus. During his time with Brutus, Spartacus's age caught up with him, seemingly transitioning from boy to old man and skipping adulthood completely. This gave Spartacus a mystical appeal, allowing him to claim mystical powers. It was the moment Spartacus had been waiting for. He claimed the power of foresight and convinced Brutus and a few others that Julius Caesar had to go, presumably to end the unnatural dictatorship and restore the power of the Senate. In reality, Spartacus had read up on recent Roman history and knew the power vacuum would create the perfect environment for another civil war. The assassination of Caesar was successful, and Spartacus immediately set about trying to revive the Servile Wars franchise to earn himself that cameo. Unfortunately, Spartacus got sick, and hope of a Servile Wars revival died with him. He had earned a small victory, however, and died with a smile on his face as Rome once again descended into civil war. Of course, Spartacus should have known the Rome franchise had legs. Caesar was dead, but the story would go on. Assassination and civil war were Roman traditions, and the Roman Republic would be succeeded by the Roman Empire in the trilogy. The sequel may or may not be better than the original, but in the end, money always has the final say. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, and fight for your favorite franchise. Are you cursed with too much money? Burdened with too much free time? Good news! I'm an author, and my satirical fantasy books are just what you need. Links are in the description.